Welcome to the 50 Degree Podcast, number one podcast for first responders dedicated to breaking the stigma of mental health. I am thrilled to introduce our guest today, Meagan McCarthy. Meagan shares her experience as a law enforcement officer and the incident that changed her life. She discussed her background before joining the police force and the challenges and rewards she faced in the early years of her career. Meagan also opens up about the emotional and mental health struggle she experienced after the incident and the importance of speaking out and seeking support. She also highlights the need for a justice system reform and her advocacy for mental health in law enforcement community. This conversation concludes with Meagan's reaction to the verdict in her case. In the conversation, Meagan discusses the impact of the verdict on her and her attorney's disbelief and distress. She shares her frustration with the jurors' implicit and bias towards cops and her lack of trust in the police. Meagan expressed her disappointment in the justice system and the dangerous precedent set by the verdict. She highlights the need to break the stigma around mental health and then in the law enforcement community. Meagan also discusses her future plans with her actions against Assembly Bill 3070 and raising awareness about the challenges faced by law enforcement officers today. This episode is an essential listen for anyone interested in dismantling the stigma surrounding mental health and the realities of what a first responder can face, not only during work, but also the repercussions of what can happen after in the courtroom. How old are your little ones?
Oh my gosh, my little guy will be 1 next month, and then my terror will be 3 in December. And then my daughter, she'll be 10 on the 10th, but she's not here right now. She's with her dad. So I just have these two guys, and of course, my husband has to work late today, and my babysitter wasn't available. So I'm like, sorry, you're going to deal with some chaos.
No, it's fine. I mean, if you want to, we could always reschedule if you like. It's up to you.
No, it's okay. I've already rescheduled so many times on you guys. I'm like, let's just do it, and hopefully they will behave.
Okay. No, I just want you comfortable. I don't know, whatever I could do to help with that. So.
Thanks.
No, yeah. So can you go into just like, who Meagan was before law enforcement and like what your life was like before all of that?
Yeah, so I was never that person that wanted to be a cop since I was little.
Same.
I actually I wanted to be a nurse, and I was going through nursing school, and one of my friends said, hey, you should come along for a ride along. It's actually pretty fun. You get to see a different side of helping people. And so I did, and I just fell in love with that aspect of helping people, I guess you want to say. Like I loved the community side of it. And then, we went on a pursuit, and that was obviously exciting. And then, you go to car accidents and you're still doing the medical part of helping. And I was like, you know what? I think this is actually what I wanted to do. And then 6 months later, I was in the academy. So, my life was nothing spectacular. I, had a couple of college credits here and there. And then I went back to school and got my degree in criminal justice. And I loved my job. I loved the institution of law enforcement. The department was great. I had some really cool assignments while I was working. And then September 4th happened.
It's so funny to hear because my story is very similar to yours. I did not care to go into law enforcement. I just got in the military at the time. And same thing like you, I had a friend that was like, hey, come on, ride along with me. And I was like, nah, I don't even like cops. It's fine. And he's like, just come on, ride along. Obviously we're just going to school. Like you don't really know what you want to do right now. Just kind of come. And I was like, all right. Same thing you, literally a pursuit on the ride along. Just a bunch of different incidents that went down. And I was like, you know what, where do I sign up? And just like you, like several months later, already in the academy. So that's so funny to hear like a very similar story to that.
Yeah.
So that's funny.
I'm the first person in my family. My sister has now joined the department, and she actually works at the same station that I worked at. So kind of small world now, but yeah, I was the first one in my family that had ever been a cop, and my whole family was kind of surprised, like, what? Why do you want to be a cop? But, they were supportive and...
No, that's awesome. Can you share some of like the challenges and like rewards that you had in the early years of your profession when you were working?
Yeah, I think, being a female presents itself with an enormity of challenges anyway. And I hate to even bring that up, but that's just the fact of the matter. It's a male-dominated profession, and entering it, you already kind of know that you got to prove yourself even more. But I liked the challenge. I thought that there is a place for everyone. And, the fact that my partners would call me to help out on domestics or child cases. And then, you have the male partners for when you need a barricade or you need a door rammed or, whatever. But one of the coolest things I ever did was I became a school resource officer. So I was an elementary school resource officer for 6 different elementary schools, and I connected with those students and I absolutely adored it. And I was able to partner with some other people in my department, and we created an autism awareness patch, which was awesome. And that was really one of the last things that I did before my shooting.
Wow. That's awesome to hear. And yeah, we had an episode with a female deputy as well on the topic of female in law enforcement. One thing I noticed too, like I was at RTO at the academy for 3 or 4 years. So, and one thing I always brought up to my female cadets was just like, it's going to be much harder. You're going to have to prove yourself. And it really is true. Like it really is a male dominant profession. It's definitely going to be one of those things where you have to work that much more into it. So I applaud you for, having that mindset before and whatnot. Is there anything you would like advice you would give to like another female wanting to come into law enforcement?
I would just say, it's a very cliche statement, but I do believe in it wholeheartedly. Like, if you have the right intentions and this is what you want to do, then ignore the negativity, ignore the haters, just do what makes you happy, because at the end of the day, like, you're the only one that will be fulfilled by what you choose to do. And just know that there is a lot of noise, especially, since the last couple years, the last decade, I'd say, there's been this wave of violence towards cops that there's never been a precedent before in American history. So it is challenging and it is going to be harder because you have to break a lot more barriers and stereotypes, but it is a super rewarding career. I mean, I loved it. My partners were supportive. My department was supportive. My admin was supportive. So if you don't have that kind of stuff where you're working, then go somewhere else and find it, because it does exist.
Exactly. So on to the main topic, or like the topic of your story, kind of go into that. But can you explain your experience or the incident like 2019 and kind of like what led up to the incident itself?
Yeah, so on September 4th, 2019, I responded to what we call as an unknown problem. Somebody was calling 911 and we didn't really know what was happening. It ended up being a mom was calling the cops on her son. She wanted him removed from the house, and all she was saying was, "Oh my God, oh my God." And then the line kind of goes dead with dispatch, but she's still on the phone, but she's not communicating. She's not answering questions. So I happen to be in the area. So I respond. And the way my department runs is 1-man unit. We don't have the manpower or the staff to run 2-man units. And something like that, it's a priority call. You respond. You don't sit back and wait for your partners, and you'd be derelict in your duties. So I park about 2 houses down and I start walking up the driveway, and the front door flies open. Out comes the suspect and he's walking directly towards me. He makes like a beeline towards me. And, as a cop, like, you can tell the type of experiences you're going to have with someone, whether it's going to be an encounter where you can have a conversation, or it's already going to be escalated to somebody is aggressive, they're mad. His fists were clenched. He was, cursing. He was mad. And out behind him is his mom, and she's holding like a large steak knife. And so we meet kind of halfway in the driveway. And the very first thing I say to him is like, "Relax, what's going on?" Part of our training is you got to render the scene safe. So I conducted detention. I placed his hands at the small of his back, and that sets him off. Within, I think, 13 to 15 seconds of me arriving is when we start fighting. I'm going through the whole training, the verbal commands, the defensive tactics. I try and use my baton. Nothing is working. He ends up grabbing my baton from me and throws it. And then the video kicks on about 3.5 minutes after we've been fighting. And he's punching me in the face over and over. And I can tell I'm losing that fight. I'm starting to, lose consciousness, starting to feel like I'm just not in a good space. So we end up falling to the ground and he overpowers me, and we end up fighting over my gun. Then in the video, you can see, we're trapped on the ground and he pins my arm in the dirt, and we end up discharging a round, which ends up malfunctioning. And he takes my gun from me as I'm able to go onto my hands and knees, and I look up at him and he's pointing the gun at my forehead, and I hear him pull the trigger, or I hear the trigger click, and I had so much pain to my face. I had broken the bone right here that I thought I had been shot. My brain couldn't process how a gun was pointed at me and I wasn't shot. It ended up stovepiping when it was on the ground. So that ultimately saved my life. And then it gives me enough chance to get up and run away for cover. And then he shoots at me as I'm running away. And then miraculously, my partners show up and he gets into a gunfight with them. And he's shot like 6 or 7 times and then he's taken to the hospital.
Wow. So there was a round shot in the middle of that. That's what caused the stovepipe.
Yeah. So in the video, you can see like a round is discharged in the ground. You can see like the dirt come out and you can hear it. And so what happened was his hand was wrapped around the slide, so it wasn't able to fully cycle. So instead of that round being, kicked out, it went straight up and down like a stovepipe. So when he pulled the trigger, he didn't know that it had stovepiped. And then he's able to clear the malfunction and then fire at me as I'm running away.
So in the moments where obviously like you didn't know there was a stovepipe at the time, but what was kind of going through your mind when you hear that click from your pistol and you have to face this guy with your gun?
It was a huge wave of emotions. Part of me felt so guilty for what had happened. I mean, I was thinking about my daughter. It was just me and my daughter at the time. And all I could think about was, oh my God, I was about to be killed for what? Who's going to pick her up from school? I told her, I'll see you later. We never say goodbye. I dropped her off at kindergarten that morning. And then, this sense of like shame, like a cop's worst nightmare is having their gun taken from them. And, obviously I had no idea any of this was captured on video, no idea, but, I know I had my audio going and it's hard to explain all of the emotions that you feel when you're in a near-death experience.
No, I can only imagine. One thing I talk about the reason why I asked about that is because in my OIS, it was a hostage situation, and I remember thinking before making the decision, like I saw the kid was like, kind of, I don't want to go too much because it's all about you, but there was a part of it where I explained where it was like, I feel like things slow down, and I was thinking about like my son was only 4 months at the time, and I was just thinking like, well, you're never gonna know me, I'm never gonna know you. It was so weird. It's like time is so slow, and like I'm saying my goodbyes to someone that's not even in the town where I'm working or the county I'm working, but goodbye type of thing, and like just I don't know, like try to like mentally like say this goodbye over whatever. Like I'm not a very religious person, but like there was a God I was pretty much talking to something, and I was just like, can you let him know for me? And then like make the decision like, cool, like, well, time to go save this kid and do what I have to do. But obviously, when I think of like hearing my audio, the audio from the moment I show up to the time of the shooting is quick. But when I'm thinking about the whole situation, I'm like, it felt like everything was slowed down so I could be able to have this moment, do that. And then we know with like science and whatnot, like everyone experiences traumatic incidents differently and these incidents differently. So sometimes time, goes fast. Sometimes time goes slow. For me, time was very slow in that sense of like thinking of all that and kind of processing all that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. And that's actually a question I've been asked quite a bit is what was going through your mind? And, the defense like tore me apart for all of my thoughts when in all reality it was like 2.5 to 3 seconds between when he took my gun. I don't know how to explain it to you unless you've lived through something, and I pray nobody ever has to live through something like that, but it's like I can still remember the smell. Like I remember the way he looked. It's almost like what's that movie with Keanu Reeves where it's like I think it's The Matrix and he's like slow dodging the bullets? Like it's almost like that experience, like an out of body, like you're watching yourself.
Yes. No, it really is. One thing that kind of like helped me was I think post OIS I was going to OIS school for detectives, and they're kind of explaining all different sciences behind it. After that as well, I was also talking to my therapist was Dr. Jana Price, and her husband actually wrote a book called Processing Under Pressure. It's all the different sciences that go into traumatic incidents with law enforcement officers and like what they experience when they go into these different things, and explains like all that. So hearing all that from someone who did all the science behind it, it's like, hey, it's completely normal to experience like these long drawn out things in your mind, even though it was a second or two. Yeah, have you ever heard about that book before?
No, I haven't, but I mean that really makes sense. I actually listened to the guys from Force Science. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but I listened to them at a conference last week, and it's totally eye-opening when you actually hear, like you said, the science behind the brain and why certain things happen the way they do and why we process things. And when you think about it, it's actually pretty miraculous that like our brain is able to shut off certain senses to save us, and then you're able to remember everything. I went through EMDR and that was awful. I know that there's other great clinicians out there, and maybe I just didn't have the right one, but EMDR syncs both sides of your brain so you're able to process it. And my brain was like, heck no, we're not going back there.
I was actually about to, when you brought that up, I was like, whoa, how was that? Because I'm thinking about doing it as well. But now you're making me not want to.
Well, maybe ask somebody else, because I went to one session and I swore it off. I was like, you guys are crazy if you think this helps. But I do know that there has been great success with it. I know that there are tons of great clinicians and people have, healed from it. But for me, my brain was like, nope, we're good.
Can you give like you don't have to go in detail because obviously you didn't like it, but just kind of like, I guess like me asking, just like, what is it? What can someone expect if they go try to do it?
Well, so my understanding of EMDR from when it was explained to me and when I went through a session is it's almost like a hypnosis. Like you're visually focused on one thing. So for me, it was like a clock, like with like the little, like the typical movies where it's like the thing that goes, and they say certain phrases to you. And during all of this, it, links your logical brain with your reactive brain. And so you're able to put ration behind your triggers. So instead of trash can lids closing or balloons popping or, like fireworks are so triggering to me that it almost puts me in like a paralyzed state. So you're supposed to be able to like be exposed to the trigger by reliving everything again, but then it links your brain to have a normal reaction to it instead of a triggered reaction. I hope that kind of makes sense. But my very first session, we just went straight into it. And I think it was like 2 weeks after my shooting. And I just don't think I was ready for it. And it obviously was a lot more triggering than I think healing. I mean, maybe now it's been 4 years. Now I might be better for it. Yeah, it was an experience for sure.
No, definitely. It sounds like so you're purposely going into that trigger then. You're purposely causing that trigger to happen?
Yes, exactly. So you're going to like your worst triggers, your worst memories. For me, the shooting, it was take me back to when you're on your hands and knees looking at him. What did you see? What did you feel? What did you smell? Tell me what it sound like. What did, it takes you directly there. And, as you know, mental health is like, it's there, but your brain wants to forget about it so you can go through daily life. I know people have had great success with it. I know color therapy has been huge for people, but just wasn't for me at the time.
So then what has worked for Meagan for mental health post that incident?
Talking to a therapist, she was a trauma PTSD focused therapist. I think that was really helpful. The county canceled my benefits when I retired, so I no longer saw her, and that's okay because I feel like what I learned over the last 2.5 years when I was with her, I'm able to, process myself now. But I will say the biggest thing, hands down, that has completely transformed the way that I am is speaking about it, is talking about it and being real about it and authentic, and sharing my journey has been the closure that I was hoping I was going to get in trial. And because I didn't, I was not mentally prepared for what happened. So when I said, you know what, like this is not okay, and I went public to the news and everybody, that has been the most healing I have ever felt in the last 4 years.
Kind of like getting it off your chest, what you're feeling and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, mental health is still very stigmatized. It's still very taboo. There's still, a huge cloud over mental health that when you start talking about it, people kind of like tiptoe around you. They don't know what to say. They don't know what's going to bother you.
Yeah.
So you become like almost like a hermit. Like, I don't know about you, and I hope this is not the case, but I had no friends anymore. My brothers and sisters that you go through the academy with and you work with, you think like you'll be friends forever, and nobody talked to me anymore. So it was very isolating. And yeah, mental health just became like, obviously I'm not a therapist. I don't think I could ever do that because I don't think I have the right words to say other than for myself. But mental health became like a passion to talk about because I felt so ashamed by what I was going through. I wanted to turn it into like a power to maybe help somebody else not feel how I did.
No, that's good. Sorry to hear about your situation and how you kind of felt a little bit more isolated in that aspect. I would say for me, I guess because I myself had the stigma very strong coming from the Marine Corps and going into law enforcement. So the stigma for myself was even there. Like I did not care to, even after my OIS and after my friend killed himself on duty, it was just just more like my thing was just like pushing my own stigma to myself to make myself feel lonely when I didn't really have to. Because when I actually finally talked with someone, like I think post OIS was probably maybe a year and some change later, I was like, wow, like this actually helps. And then when I told people, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this podcast and be vulnerable, and if people hate me, they hate me. I could give a shit less. I guess my thing going to law enforcement, I didn't care to be a cop. So if I did lose any friends, I was like, oh, well, I don't give a shit about, like, doesn't matter to me anyway. So I had my own friends before law enforcement, it was fine. But it was great to see that a lot of people supported me in the situation, and they were still there. You still, like, I remember you brought up in the beginning of the episode, like talking about the noise and whatnot. You're still going to have those people who hate and are going to make up different stuff. And I guess, like, I feel like that in my situation is like a small percentage, like 0.5%. And I could really care less about what they think or what bothers them. But it's just great to hear that the 99.5% of it is just extremely supportive.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. I mean, even what you're doing, like this podcast centered around mental health for first responders, is huge because, as I've been kind of on this second chance path that I've been on the last couple months, I've talked to hundreds of officers, not just nationwide, but worldwide. And I think there is a refreshing aspect to people that are vulnerable and they're authentic. And hey, like, I went through a critical incident and I had my struggles, but this is what helped me, or this is what I encountered, and this is how I overcame. Because I think we're finding out that there is actually a lot more first responders that are struggling than we even will ever know about. So when you're able to put yourself out there and say, hey, listen, I was in the military, I was a cop, I did this, and look at me. I'm better now, but I still have my days. That is so refreshing to feel like you have somebody that gets it.
No, definitely too. And like you said, like there is a lot of people that we don't, hopefully one day we could bring them to light, and they do feel like me, like I said, it took me a long time to even break my own stigma. And I know with your situation and, like I said, the new path that you're going to be on with mental health, like you're going to do a phenomenal job with, again, you're already telling your story, you're already being vulnerable, and that's awesome. And you do great, because I guess people in my life, like mentors who were much older than me, like the old head cops, right? You would think that they would never be about that. But it took them in private setting to be like, hey, little brother, like I talk with someone, and I never even knew. You're like, oh shit, like you talk with someone? Like, yeah, but obviously they're not putting it out there. So I was like, you know what? If this person who as badass as he is could talk with someone, then why can't I? I mean, I understand that they don't want to do it on a much broader scale. So I was like, you know what? I'll be the one to take this more like publicly and be vulnerable and take it to a broader scale with the podcast. I'll write a book and talk about, helping first responders, break their own stigma with mental health, and like whatever comes my way that's negative, I could care less. Because again, to me, it's just a small percentage, and most people are supportive. And when it did happen, I was like you said, a lot of cops out of the woodwork that you never thought would be hurting are actually hurting. They're not going to say it, but at least we could be there as the small percentage of people who are trying to help and tell them like, hey, this is how I felt as well. The fact that you're willing to take on this new path and be like, you know what, I'm going to use this and to turn into a good and help people with their mental health, any other first responder who's feeling the same way. But for you, is like the fact that you're taking it more of like, you know what, like, yeah, mental health side too. But I think I read something as well that you're trying to go more towards like the justice system and try to like create some kind of reform there for officers, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of fell into a couple of weird categories where I was a cop and I was the victim of an attempted homicide. And then I was the victim of a crime who was failed by the justice system. And I wasn't recognized as a victim by the own justice system that I swore to protect. My theory behind it is if I feel this way, I know there's other officers that have felt that way or do feel that way. And I honestly was tired of just waking up every day like, what is my life? I was so negative. I was, the pity party, woe is me. And I'm like, I cannot live this way. Like, I have little kids that are looking at me. What type of example am I? I did not survive the last 4 years to live like this. So like I said, it is empowering to not give like a face to the trauma, but like, hey, look, I have been open about my suicide struggles and my mental health struggles, but I've also been able to be a mom and be a wife and a person. And part of that comes from holding the right people accountable. And, the state of California and the district attorney's office completely failed me. I've had many conversations with people, whether it's at the assembly or my local legislators, that have have acknowledged that there was a failure and a miscarriage of justice. And, you know, when you stand up and you're in the position of politics, and I hate to go down this route, but unfortunately that's just where we are, is when you stand up and say you support law enforcement, you get canceled. So I have run into a huge roadblock of asking people for help, and people aren't willing to help because I'm a cop. And that's tragic. And I just don't accept that narrative. So I'm going to do everything I can. I'm helping one of my friends on his campaign team for Assembly District 53, if anybody's there. We need to start getting the right people in office to make a voice for us, because that Assembly Bill 3070 ruined my life. And I just think that if we continue to be the silent majority, this is not going to be a place that we want to raise our kids.
No, exactly. And one thing that we always talked about, so obviously you work down south. I was cop in California as well, but we're in Central California. We always talked about the cops where we worked at. We always talked about like the south and the north, like how it's pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we still have a pretty good culture around. We obviously have the same California laws, but still how things are around the area is nothing like how the north and south of California is. But one thing I noticed in law enforcement working in California was like obviously the downhill trajectory of where it was going. My question to you is, when you were working, because for me it was like loving the job, everything was great. Even though I'm still working in California, everything's going great. But there was still always something in the back of my head, just keeping in touch with like the times, the present times of like how we're like kind of like where law enforcement is going, where the pendulum is at, and like is this going to change? I was like, you know what? I need to start having like a plan B just in case like I need to get out of this space and get a new career, because my wife and my son is going to be is first, right? And so it's like, can I still work this job and still have as much fun as I'm doing, still create the change that I'm making in my community, but is it going to be worth it down the road? And so that's why I said like I created plan B and whatnot. With your case, when I saw it come up with the whole jury decision, was like, it was unexpected but it wasn't a surprise for me. I believe it, you know, it's California, like welcome to California, you know? And I was like, as much as you didn't think it would happen, it's still not a surprise for people who work in California. And so like before that happened, when you were working, like did you ever think about like the state of like where it's at, and like maybe if I do get into some kind of incident, are they going to be there? Because obviously they weren't, and it's fucking stupid that no one was, like the state itself wasn't there to back you up. And it's just again, like it's such a horrible position to be in verdict wise, and I can only imagine what that's like. But when I like, again, to me it wasn't a surprise, and that's why I wanted to have a plan B, because of stuff like this, and it's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I joined in January of 2016, so it was right after, you know, the Ferguson effect, when in 2015 we saw the complete shift with all the Ferguson riots, and we saw a crazy new precedent that had been set that we had never seen before. But I still believed in what law enforcement stood for. I knew that I would have my challenges and my days. You know, law enforcement is not an easy job. It's not for everyone, but I loved it. And, you know, I did not have a plan B, because whether this was my ignorance or being naive, I didn't think I would ever need one. You know, you always train to be like, okay, if I'm walking up to this house and I get ambushed from the side, I'm going to find cover here. Or, you know, when I respond to this active shooter, this is my plan. I'm going to grab this, I'm going to do that. But I never saw myself in this type of situation. And I may get slack for that, and that's okay, because part of why I'm so vocal is to maybe help somebody else. I mean, if you aren't training ground combat in jujitsu, you probably should. If you're a female and you already know you have a smaller stature, maybe you should be a little bit more ready for a situation like this. So I wasn't working during, you know, this 2020 epidemic, I like to call it. You know, I went out in September of 2019, and I can't even imagine being a cop these days. I mean, I support cops 110%. Obviously, we need them. We love them. My sister's a cop. My husband's a cop. I still have friends that are cops. But for those people that are still doing this job every day, I commend you tenfold, because it is even more of a thankless job. And it's even more of a risk of not coming home. I mean, just the other day, Deputy Ryan Klinkenbroomer sitting at a stoplight, waiting to go get dinner, and he's just ambushed and executed for no reason. And those dangers are happening every single day. Before it was like you would hear a cop like once a week and you're like, dang, that's crazy. It's not a shock anymore to hear it 2 or 3 times a day. I mean, we've almost become numb to it. And that I think that is tragic. I go on Instagram and I follow FOP and they post anytime an officer is shot or killed. And it seems like it's every couple hours. So I think that is obviously very wise. And that's a great plan for everybody to have a plan B, whether it's something to take your law enforcement experience and use that to maybe go teach at a college, or to use it in more of a public safety administration instead of just like frontline cop, or to do something different. You know, some of my friends have become realtors. They do like long distance trucking. They have backup plans. And I think that's genius, but no, I did not have one.
For my case, like I always tell everyone when I had the plan B and I was like, man, if I was like in Texas or like, let's say a state like that, Florida, I would like, there would be no plan B still. Like I wouldn't even be thinking about it, you know, because the fact of helping is just the main reason why I wanted to do it. And again, that first ride along. And again, those first couple of years were great. Even though we didn't get paid very much where we worked, the fact I got the help. But there came a tipping point where, yes, we're still helping in that sense, but is it worth it? Is the state going to be there to back us up? And this is before your incident. Like, is the state going to be there? And I started thinking, like, I don't think it's going to be. And then after your incident, again, your incident was a big part of like my decision, like that, you know, that's going to happen. We'll see what happens later on with the verdict. And then seeing all these other people getting attacked consistently in California, and then people getting in trouble for doing the job in California. And then you didn't work 2020, I worked 2020, and we're getting sent to the riots to work these other counties up north and down south. Again, our area in Central was pretty, that's why I said level where we lived, because it's pretty good. And we had no riots where we worked, but these bigger cities, right? These bigger liberal cities, like, all right, we'll go work with it. And it's like, man, like we're doing this job for the state. We can't just, for some people, they could just get up and move, right? In my case with my family, obviously my wife works here. Like we can't just move on the spot. Being in law enforcement, you can't just be like, well, I can't just move from one agency to one agency. You have to go through the whole process. Go to the state, you got to do a whole academy again. And then the whole process, like, you know what? Yeah, let's just find a different plan B for that. But again, like it says, it's just the state. It's not the profession. I just think it's just the state. And I wish the state had a much better, like, hey, we have your back. Like, just like most other states, you know. But obviously I should have known it's California. Just like people probably who work in New York, they probably know as well. It's like we work where we work, and we're hoping the pendulum one day came down to the other side. It hasn't, and it hasn't in a long time, and it sucks. But, you know, like, again, it's just one of those things where I'll just take the other route and just enjoy my family time and whatnot. On to your verdict, though. When you first heard it come out, like, what was your thoughts, like, when you were there and they actually said the verdict out loud? Like, what was going through your mind?
So I actually was not present in the courtroom when the verdict came out. I believe they deliberated for 4 or 5 days. I think it was actually 5 days. And my husband and I had already planned a vacation like months prior. And we decided, you know, like it would probably be best to be out of town just in case we don't hear what we want to hear. You know, we can kind of escape it. I wouldn't go so far as saying I was surprised. I thought instead of an attempted murder, we may get an assault with a deadly weapon. I did not think that they were going to completely acquit him and set him free the following day. I was not mentally prepared for that. So my sister went to the courtroom with a couple of people I used to work with, and I remember her texting me, okay, the jury is coming in and they're saying they have a verdict, but they only have a verdict for 3 charges and they're hung on 3 others. So we're waiting to hear from what the judge says. And I'm like, okay. And then a couple minutes goes by. Okay, we're going to read the verdict. I'm like, okay. And she texts me, she's like, Meagan, you know, ... I'm like, what? She's like, not guilty on attempted murder, not guilty on assault with a deadly weapon against a peace officer, guilty of a misdemeanor of negligent discharge, and they're hung on the removal of a firearm, battery against a peace officer, and something else like obstructing arrest. And I just remember sitting there looking at my phone for what felt like 2 hours. And I'm like, okay, there's no way. Like rubbing my eyes like, okay, I just had, you know, a brain episode. I can't see right. Something's going on. And my husband comes over and he's like, what did they say? And I just show him my phone. And we just sat there in complete disbelief. And then I got a call from my attorney a few minutes later, and she was just sobbing, crying. You know, she was so upset and so distraught, and we just couldn't believe it. And so my attorney pulled the jury afterwards. She talked to the jury foreman. And moral of the story is, 5 out of 12 of my jurors had an implicit bias towards cops. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter what evidence they saw or heard. They were going to find him not guilty because they don't trust the police. And they found me not credible. They said that when you sign up to be a cop, what do you expect to happen to you? They didn't view me as a victim of anything and just completely villainized me from the beginning. And I processed that for a couple days, and then it just lit a fire like, well, what can we do? And I was basically told nothing because double jeopardy exists. And I don't think it's worth it to retry the other charges and put you back on the stand. I mean, it was so traumatic and so triggering for me to be cross-examined for 3 days. I agreed with the district attorney. I was like, yeah, you're dang right. I cannot go back up there if this is what the outcome is. Like, I lost all faith in the justice system, all faith in her, all faith in everything. And, we're still hopeful that maybe a federal case will be opened on the remaining charges. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but yeah, it's still something that I talk about and I say it out loud and I'm like, how did that happen? I mean, I know California is pretty wonky, but how can you watch a video of a crime being committed and say that crime wasn't committed? So then I sat there and I'm like, well, if you guys are saying he didn't try to kill me, but I remember looking at the gun and it's on video, then what happened to me? It was just completely villainizing.
Oh, exactly. What, man, you talked about earlier with officers kind of being numb to situations happening to us more often than we're used to. And I feel like a lot of our partners, our friends, our family who still does it, it's like they know of the situations like of that Meagan's been through could happen or other people has been through could happen to them in California, but they don't want to really think of the reality of that it could happen. And it sucks because I guess maybe they probably don't want to think about, because I feel like, we do the job. It's like, oh, look, that happened to Meagan. And they go right back into it. And it's like, oh, I don't want to think about it because it's going to be too much. It's my job. With that verdict, like, what do you think that means for law enforcement officers and victims of violent crimes now in California?
Well, I believe it set a really dangerous precedent, not just for victims to be shown in a court of law that you are not protected. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what Marcy's law says. It doesn't matter what you are taught growing up. You're not protected and they really don't care about you. And then it sets a very dangerous precedent for criminals. I mean, if you are telling the public and these criminals, you can try and murder a cop on duty, on camera, admitting to it under your Fifth Amendment right that you tried to kill her, and you can still get away and still be set free. Why are we surprised at this crime surge? Why are we surprised with everything that is going on when, I hate to make it political, but what do these politicians expect when they're getting carjacked now? They're getting home invasion robberies. They're becoming victims of crime. And I hate to say it, but it's like until you are a victim, it's almost too late. The damage has been done. All of these laws have been enacted in California. We are not going to see that pendulum coming back for years, if ever.
I don't think if ever.
I don't think so either.
And that's where I was like, again, like there's a tipping point, and I saw my tipping point. I'm like, as much as I love it, as much as I wish I could be there for the people, it's at this point, it's not worth it for my family. So
you're being there for officers more now than you ever were. And I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah. And that's what I said, like with my situations, I just hope to kind of get back in that sense and whatnot. Back onto, I read something about the defense talking about reasonable suspicion in the case and whatnot. And I was just like, what the that is complete reasonable suspicion. Like, I don't know what definition that lawyer's looking at, but I was like, I'm confused on how that's even brought up in this and being held like, yeah, that's a thing.
Exactly. And I think I was cross-examined for, I'm not even exaggerating, like 7 hours about this exact thing. I'm reading from the actual post handbook on reasonable suspicion. Like I'm literally reading him that a 911 call is the justification for reasonable suspicion. And he's still arguing with me that I had no right to detain him. And I'm like, and then I start getting like kind of emotional because now I can kind of tell like, the tide really has turned and these jurors are looking at me and they're believing what he's saying. And they're looking at me like I just, snatched somebody off the street and I said, hey, listen, we're going to jail. And he kept saying that I didn't have probable cause. And I'm like, well, hold on. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard for detention. Probable cause is for arrest. I wasn't trying to arrest him. Yeah, but you can't just go and put your hands on anybody. I'm like, if somebody calls, I don't need to explain this to you, but it was so frustrating. And even the jury was like, yeah, I agree with that. And then he was able to brainwash them and say, listen, if you believe that a cop is not doing their job right, you can take their gun and kill them. And the jury was like, good to know. That's cool. I'm like, well, wait, that's actually really against the law. Please don't be telling civilians this, because that's not true. You can't just go around murdering people. That's quite illegal. And what was really frustrating was my attorney never objected. And when she did object, the judge struck it down, and I didn't have anything else to fight for or fight with, because it didn't matter what I said. It was completely used against me.
Do you think that's because of 3070, the bill?
I think it's multi-pronged. I think 3070 allowed those jurors on the jury trial that should never have been in there in the first place. So when they already have anti-cop beliefs, and then you're spewing anti-cop rhetoric, and a person of a standard of the law is telling you this, you're like, oh, okay, well, now how I felt the last couple of years is validated because a lawyer is telling me this. And in all reality, it was complete bullshit, for lack of better words, and completely false. It was a complete miscarriage of justice and the legal system, and it was never not allowed. And that was really what broke my heart, was nobody in that courtroom, whether it was the judge or my attorney or anybody there, stood up for me. Nobody had my back. I sat in there by myself. Not one person from my administration or my union or my department was there. And that was really the moment where I felt like I'm doing this on my own, on the tails of an entire law enforcement institution that's under attack, and I'm sitting here being battered for it.
And sometimes it's just the reality of things coming from it's sad, because coming from like the military and like law enforcement, I always talked about like, at the end of the day, we're just a number. As much as we talk about thin blue line this, and I never word that shit anyways, but it's just like, we're family, bro, whatever, sis. And it's just like you said, you're up there and it's like, where are they now? Like, no one's here except my family. And again, like, I have those few who are really close, and like I obviously have those friends who are really close. But as a whole, no one not even the president couldn't come to be here, during this tough time. So I can only imagine, like, that's hard. But with you going through the incident and then you having to go through this, because I feel like this is just, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but the verdict itself was just as like, you're trying to heal from the incident, 2019, maybe you're progressing to, be better. And then all of a sudden you hear the verdict and you're just like having to go through another incident of like, that's going to test your mental health. How did you kind of navigate that? Like, I feel like were you getting better at the time and then having to hit another response of that again?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing my therapist had told me over the last couple of years was, just wait for trial and stand up there and be proud that you're a survivor and he can't take this from you, and share your story, share your truth, because when you're in the middle of an investigation, I can't give out all the details. I can't talk openly about more than what the video was shown, because the video was public knowledge. I was able to talk about that. But everything that happened before, people saw this tiny, tiny little out of context clip, and they blew it up into this fake story and this fake narrative. And I felt like I wanted to defend myself for years, but I knew I couldn't. I was, very anxious about trial, but I also felt like, okay, my therapist is right. Being someone who has almost come out on the other side of PTSD, I feel prepared. I feel ready. I'm able to manage my triggers. I have my little bracelet. If I start feeling anxious, I can snap that on my wrist. I felt good. And then a few hours into being cross-examined, I was like, I am not good. This is not good. And when the verdict came out, that, I'll be honest, that took a couple years off of my healing journey for sure. It was more now of a betrayal by the system that I thought I almost died for. And I hate to get so morbid, but there's always an inherent risk of being a cop. There's a chance that you may not come home. Yes, it may not be in the forefront of our brain all the time, but you wear a bulletproof vest for a reason. And if I would have died, I would have been a hero and my name would be etched in Sacramento, and Meagan was such a great cop, whatever. But then people would move on and their lives would go on as it should. My daughter would be an orphan, but at least I died for a purpose. At least I died protecting the community I swore to protect. And then I sat on that stand and the verdict came out and I said, I almost died for this. I almost died for this state and this county when the own citizens in my county, a jury of my peers can't even look at me as a human being. I'm just demoralized to the patches on my shoulders. That's when I said, you know what? God bless those that still do it, but this job is not for me anymore. And then I went on kind of this like rampage media tour of exposing what happened to me because I just could not take it. I could not sit by and be like, well, that sucks. Because after I went public, I talked to 3 other cops in my exact county that had the same thing happen to them. They stood on trial. They were called horrible names. They were villainized. And Assembly Bill 3070 allowed their suspect to walk free. And I said, we cannot just allow this to happen anymore. So, it definitely took some out of me mentally, but over the last couple months that I've been able to share my story and be more authentic and open and say, listen, you may not like the stuff I post on social media about the truths of mental health, and that's fine, just don't look. But I'm still going to do it because it helps me.
So on that note, how do we break the stigma of mental health in the first responder community?
I think by doing exactly what you are doing and by what I am hopefully doing, when people, and I hate to even put this into these terms, but when you have a cold and you go to the doctor, you're not ashamed to get antibiotics and an off work note because it's a physical ailment that you can actually see. You can see the runny nose, you can see the temperature on the thermometer, but because mental health, you can't see it, it's something inside. For some reason, people can't grasp it. And I talk to cops every single day from sun up to sundown, and their biggest problem is organizational betrayal. They feel like if something happens to them, their department is not going to have their back. They're going to be the next sacrificial lamb that's on CNN 5 p.m. news. And if we can somehow make it department-wide, statewide, nationwide to have mandatory mental health checks. I don't know about you, but in my department, you had to go what's called use of force training every 3 months. You have to get requalified on your gun, first aid, whatever that topic may be. I think having mental health checks for everyone would have less of a stigma because if everyone's doing it, then it's okay if I do it. And then you can open the conversation to more peer support and more services if that deputy or officer needs it. But just bringing awareness to it and talking about it, I think has helped a lot already.
No, definitely. I know your husband's not on here, but with you going through the incident, the verdict, and the topic of mental health, what are your thoughts with him still, like, because I mean, the betrayal of the state and the system itself, like, what kind of goes to your mind with your husband still doing the job in California and him leaving every day with that bulletproof vest and doing the job that you used to do as well?
Well, I'm definitely bitter, not towards him because I know he doesn't have the option. We both agree that if it was feasible, he wouldn't even be in this profession, but he was one of those kids that grew up wanting to be a cop. His dad served in Riverside PD for I think almost 30 years. And my husband saw his dad go to work every day and he was proud of his job and he loved it. And he grew up, all he wanted to do was be a cop. So for him to walk away from a job that he's always wanted, I think is a lot different than maybe me or you that were like, okay, well, like you in this instance, you have a plan B. Now I have like a forced plan B. I am definitely bitter towards the state and a little bit towards the county that I served. They didn't really treat me right when I was going through workman's comp, but that's a story for another time. But I just try to do my best to compartmentalize what happened to me with what's going on with my husband, and I try and be as supportive as I possibly can. But we have open communications about how I'm feeling, and I think it actually has been beneficial to speak so openly about mental health because it has helped him too.
No, and I applaud him for still doing the job and serving obviously the community and the state and whatnot, and being there for you and having to go through all that and still put on the uniform and keep working. So great on him.
Thank you.
So what's your plans now moving forward?
I still don't have a plan B. So here I am 4 years later and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm actually currently in school to finish my nursing degree. I stay at home with the babies right now. My hope is that I can continue doing this new passion. I didn't realize how much I would actually enjoy this community and this space, and I have made the most incredible connections just by speaking openly about what happened to me and connecting with others. That, I'm not the most religious person, but I do believe God spared me that day. And I think that maybe this is the purpose and the path I was supposed to be walking all along. So although I'll never really understand why this happened to me, I, still have my days where I'm very angry and bitter, and like how could something so tragic happen to anyone, not just me, but how could, God allow you to live through something so crazy and then just be like, all right, have a good day. But I just hope that I can continue connecting with people and sharing my story and hopefully doing whatever I can to break that barrier.
That's good to hear. Do you plan on doing any kind of like starting a podcast or anything?
I don't know. I mean, I would love to do whatever I can to connect with the most people. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I would love to just be able to speak to as many first responders or just moms that feel isolated from the world, or just people that maybe didn't have the opportunity to have mental health resources. Again, I'm not a therapist, but when you've kind of been in this path for a couple years, you kind of learn what works and what doesn't. And, I don't know, whatever door opens, we'll see. I have some ideas, but right now I'm just kind of taking it day by day, being a guest on your podcast and others.
I think it'd be good. I think one thing, like I said, with my podcast was it's very therapeutic to constantly have to and you going on the podcast is I feel I probably feel the same way, but you're telling the story is kind of making it every time easier, I guess, to explain it, and kind of like it's very kind of like people where the therapist tells you, write it down on a piece of paper and throw it away, but you're kind of putting it verbally out there, your story over and over, and it's like, okay, now I feel so much better. When I wrote my book, the same thing. It was like very therapeutic in that sense of, I guess, like feeling a million times better too. So yeah, I think it would be good. I think you'd do great doing all that.
Well, thank you.
Is there any plans towards like going after the bill that kind of affected you in that sense, or?
Yeah, so I'm working with a law firm right now to write what's called a facial challenge, which is basically a lawsuit against the bill. So it's not a person, but it's saying that on its face, the bill violated my constitutional rights. So anything to do with the legal system is very time consuming. It's very expensive. It's very lengthy. So I'm hoping we will have that opportunity to publish that in the courts, hopefully the beginning of next year. If that doesn't work out, then I'm hoping to find a assemblyman or woman that is willing to author a reform for 3070 and to get it up on the assembly floor and present my story and my case and say, there's been this case and dozens others that have been violated by this bill, and hopefully we can get the assembly members to vote it down. However, it would be the same assembly members that voted for it, so I don't think I'd have much luck there, and California is not pro-law enforcement at all, so I'm not giving up hope. I'm still charging that hill every single day, but it's just not a very friendly state for me right now.
No, exactly. Well, how can our listeners support your cause and raise awareness?
I think just by doing what you and I are doing. Talk about it, check in on your people, check in on yourself. Know that if you need help, there is absolutely no shame in admitting it. My messages are always open. I talk to dozens and dozens of cops from all over the country every day, and I either help them or point them in the direction to get help. I think the best thing to do is just pay attention to who you're voting for in office. Make sure these people actually have our best interests, and, just stand up and do your part. Thank a cop if you see them on the side of a road with a traffic accident. It's such a thankless job that even the smallest things can help someone. So just be genuine and gracious to each other, and that's all I can ask for.
Well, I appreciate it. And where can our listeners find you, get a hold of you, message you?
Well, I'm pretty lame and I only have Instagram.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this LinkedIn stuff or this TikTok. I'm 30, but I still am pretty illiterate. But social media is Instagram. It's just my name with 2 underscores after my last name. It's a subtle plug for my Instagram, but I only say that because I am on there to talk to people and meet with people. And you can meet people on my Instagram. In my community, I have some posts that have almost thousands of comments of other people that may be just like you. So if you don't connect with me, I guarantee you there's somebody else that you will connect with. So yeah, just my name on Instagram.
That's awesome. I really appreciate it, Meagan. Like I said, thanks again for reaching back out to me. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story. I know it's like, it could always be hard having to explain it and go through that and kind of relive it again. Thanks for giving like your thoughts on everything and being vulnerable and like being very honest about the whole situation and not holding back. So I appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you so much. And like you said, it is therapeutic. So thank you for giving me a space to talk about it.
I appreciate it.
And remember, seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but rather a sign of strength. The fact is, it's not about being depressed or crazy. It's just about healing. Everyone has different mental injuries, some bigger and smaller, and everyone heals in their own way, but everyone can benefit from healing. This is where the stigma broke for me, and I hope you break it for yourself. Go and talk with someone today. Who cares what anyone thinks? Message me about when your stigma first broke. I would love to hear. Stay safe and break your blue wall.